The first time the HOA president stepped onto my property, he didn't even say hello. He just looked at my livestock tank like it had personally offended him, shook his head, and said, "That thing's gotta go." 3 weeks later, 47 families in his little luxury neighborhood were standing in cold showers wondering why their water pressure suddenly felt like somebody spitting through a straw. Funny how fast people learn respect when comfort disappears. Now, before anybody in the comments starts calling me the villain here, let me explain something. I didn't wake up one morning planning to cut water to an entire subdivision. I'm not some cartoon rancher sitting on a porch polishing a shotgun and waiting for revenge opportunities. Truth is, I mostly keep to myself. Always have. My name's Wade Harper, and my family's been on that land outside Belcross County since before paved roads even existed there. 12 acres up on a ridge, horses out back, rusted fencing older than most marriages, one battered barn that somehow survived every storm Mother Nature ever threw at it. My grandfather used to say the ranch wasn't pretty, but it was honest. I like that. Then, around 2016, developers came in and built Ashbury trails right beneath us. Big houses packed shoulder to shoulder, perfect little lawns, decorative mailboxes, fake country living for people who wanted to feel rural while still ordering sushi delivery. You know the type. Most of the folks down there were decent enough, honestly. Families, retirees, remote workers from the city. But once the HOA got involved, everything changed. The president was this guy named Brent Coulter. Mid-50s, expensive golf polos, smile that always looked rehearsed. He treated the neighborhood like it was his personal kingdom. Every mailbox had to match, every fence had to be approved, and God help you if your grass wasn't the exact shade of green Brent thought looked premium. Now me, I wasn't even part of the HOA. My property existed long before their subdivision did. But Brent hated that my ranch overlooked his pristine little development because no matter how many luxury signs they planted at the entrance, there was still an old cattle ranch sitting above them with mud, horses, and equipment people actually used. And apparently, the thing that bothered him most was my livestock tank. 800 gallons. Galvanized steel. Ugly as sin. But my horses needed it. Summers out there get brutal, especially in August when the heat rolls across the ridge and the ground starts cracking like old paint. I had 4 horses at the time, including an aging mare named Rosie that needed constant access to water because of kidney issues. That tank wasn't decoration. It kept my animals alive. Brent didn't care. The first violation notice showed up taped to my gate one Tuesday morning while I was repairing fence posts. Visual nuisance, it said. Non-compliant structure negatively impacting community aesthetics. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my hammer. I remember showing it to my neighbor Earl later that evening over beers. Earl read it twice and went, "Community aesthetics?" Then looked over at my horses standing ankle-deep in mud. "Wade, I think your horses are lowering property values." I told him maybe the horses should start paying HOA dues. At first I ignored the notices because, legally, they had no authority over my property. Everybody knew that. Hell, even Brent knew it. But some people get addicted to power in weird ways, and when they realize they can't control somebody, they take it personally. That's exactly what happened. A week later, another letter came. This one included fines. $200 a day until the tank was removed. That's when I stopped laughing. I drove down to the HOA office the next morning, mostly hoping to clear things up like adults. Big mistake. Brent was sitting behind this oversized desk like a king holding court. Didn't even offer me a seat. I dropped the violation letters in front of him and said, "You know you can't enforce this on my property." He leaned back real slow, folded his hands, and smiled. "Oh, we can make life difficult, Wade." Something about the way he said it bothered me. Not angry, not emotional, calm, like he'd already decided he owned the outcome. I told him the tank stayed. He said, "Then the fines continue." I remember staring at him for a second thinking, this man really believes nobody's ever going to push back. What I didn't know yet was how far Brent was willing to go, because 3 days later, I came home from town and found 2 contractor trucks parked beside my pasture fence. And standing right next to my livestock tank was Brent himself. I pulled my truck so hard into the gravel that dust rolled halfway across the pasture, and the second I stepped out, one of the contractors raised both hands like he already knew this situation was about to go sideways. Brent didn't even flinch. He stood there in loafers that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill, pointing at my livestock tank while two guys unloaded hoses and equipment behind him like they were preparing for surgery. I walked straight up to him and said, "Tell me why there are strangers on my property." Brent adjusted his sunglasses and gave me that same practiced HOA smile. "We're resolving the violation." I actually laughed because it was so absurd I thought maybe he was joking. "You're trespassing." "No," he said calmly. "We're protecting community standards." That line still annoys me when I think about it. Community standards. Like my horses were somehow offensive because wealthy people downhill didn't like looking at a water tank while sipping wine on their patios. One of the contractors quietly pulled me aside and muttered, "Sir, we were told this was approved." I told him it absolutely was not. The poor guy looked trapped right in the middle of it, probably just trying to make a paycheck. So I said, "You might want to pack your stuff before lawyers get involved." That got their attention fast. Meanwhile, Brent kept talking like he owned the county. "You've ignored multiple notices, Wade." The board voted unanimously. I stepped closer and said, "Your board doesn't govern my land." That's when his expression changed for the first time. Tiny little crack in the armor. Not fear exactly, irritation. Like he couldn't believe someone was still resisting him. He lowered his voice and said, "People are tired of looking at this place." Now that hit deeper than I expected. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about old family land. After enough years, it stops feeling like property and starts feeling like memory. Every fence post out there had fingerprints from somebody I loved. My dad taught me to ride near that tank. My grandfather fixed pipes with his bare hands right where Brent was standing. And now this man was talking about my home like it was trash, lowering his resale values. I told the contractors to leave. Thankfully, they did. Brent lingered another minute before climbing into his SUV. And right before he shut the door, he looked at me and said, "This won't end the way you think." That sentence sat in my head all night. Not because I was scared of him, but because men like Brent only escalate. They don't stop until somebody forces them to. The next morning, I started digging through old records in my barn office. Mostly out of spite at first. My grandfather kept everything, and I mean everything. Yellowed maps, handwritten land agreements, water permits dating back generations. Half of it smelled like dust and machine oil. I wasn't even looking for anything specific when I found the easement documents. A rolled-up survey map from 1884, then another from 1902, then a stack of county filings tied together with faded twine. And suddenly, things got very interesting. See, long before Ashbury trails existed, there'd been an old gravity-fed water route running through the ridge. Natural spring water collected uphill, crossed our property underground, then continued down through the valley. Back in the late 1800s, my great-grandfather allowed nearby cattle farms temporary access through an easement agreement. Temporary. That word mattered. I spent 6 straight hours reading legal descriptions until my eyes hurt, and by midnight, I realized something huge. The subdivision developers had secured access to the pipeline itself when they built Ashbury trails, but they never purchased the actual water rights. Meaning legally, the water still belonged to whoever owned my land. Me. I honestly sat there staring at those papers thinking, there's no way they missed this. But greed makes people sloppy. Developers probably assumed nobody would ever challenge it because most landowners either wouldn't notice or wouldn't care enough to fight. And for almost a decade, they'd been right. I never cared. The water flowed. People lived their lives. Everybody moved on. Until Brent decided to go after my horses. That changed everything. The next day, I drove 2 counties over to meet a water rights attorney named Sylvia Moreno. Tiny woman, sharp eyes, no patience for nonsense. She spent maybe 20 minutes reading the documents before leaning back in her chair and going, "Well, this is a mess. Bad mess." I asked. "For them," she said. "Potentially catastrophic. Turns out under state law, I had every legal right to regulate water flow across my property so long as I didn't violate emergency access minimums. I couldn't completely cut them off permanently without triggering a county fight, but I absolutely could install flow control infrastructure on my land. I remember asking, hypothetically, how uncomfortable could I legally make this? Sylvia tried not to smile. Very. That's when the revenge stopped being emotional and started becoming strategic. And honestly, that made it way more satisfying. I hired a licensed commercial plumber 2 days later. Nice guy named Rick who kept looking between me and the easement map like he'd stumbled into a movie plot. "You're telling me this whole neighborhood's water runs through here?" "Every drop." He whistled low and said, Man, do not tell my wife this story. She'll start looking up old pipelines on Zillow. We installed the valve right near the north fence line where the main feed crossed into county utility routing. Industrial-grade steel, county-compliant, fully documented. Totally legal. That part matters. Because people online love acting like revenge stories work through movie logic, where somebody flips a switch and chaos happens. Real life doesn't work that way. Paperwork matters. Permits matter. Documentation matters. Brent never understood that. The certified letter went out Friday morning. I kept it professional. No threats. No insults. Due to ongoing harassment and unauthorized access attempts, I would now be exercising my legal rights regarding water flow management across Harper Ridge property until further agreements could be established. That was it. Simple. Clean. Terrifying. Brent called me 14 times in one afternoon. I didn't answer a single one. Then Saturday morning around 6:30, while the entire subdivision was waking up and starting coffee makers and showers, I walked out to the valve in my work boots, looked down toward Ashbury Trails sitting quiet beneath the morning fog, and turned the wheels slowly to 25% flow. You ever hear silence that feels loud? That's what it felt like standing there, like the whole ridge was holding its breath. And by noon, the panic started. The first complaints hit the HOA Facebook group before lunchtime. At first it was small stuff. People asking if anyone else had low pressure. Somebody blamed the county. Somebody else said maybe a pipe burst nearby. But by 2 o'clock the neighborhood had completely lost its mind. Sprinklers barely twitched. Dishwashers stopped mid-cycle. Upstairs showers turned into weak little drizzles that couldn't rinse shampoo out of your hair. And because Ashbury Trails was built around those ridiculous Kentucky bluegrass lawns that needed constant watering in summer heat, patches of expensive green started turning yellow almost immediately. I won't lie, watching Brent's perfect neighborhood slowly dry out felt incredibly satisfying. Not because I hated the residents. Most of them had nothing to do with this. But for years that HOA acted like power only flowed one direction. From them downward. Rules for everybody else. Consequences for everybody else. Now suddenly they were learning something uncomfortable. Dependence goes both ways. By Sunday morning, Brent finally came storming onto my property again. Except this time, he wasn't smiling. He jumped out of his SUV before the engine even stopped running and started yelling from halfway across the pasture. "You've lost your damn mind." I was filling feed buckets near the barn and didn't even look up right away. Rosie, my old mare, nudged my shoulder while Brent kept shouting about lawsuits and damages and criminal interference like louder words somehow changed county records. Finally, I turned around and said, "Morning, Brent." That almost made him angrier. "You turn that water back on right now." "It is on." "You know exactly what I mean." I leaned against the fence and said, "Funny thing about property rights. They matter when it's your property, huh?" His face went red instantly. "You can't hold an entire neighborhood hostage over a horse tank." And there it was. That sentence right there. Because to him, this whole thing was still about winning. About authority. About making sure nobody challenged him publicly. But to me, it stopped being about the tank days ago. It became about respect. About the fact that some people move into a place and immediately start acting like history began the day they arrived. I walked over slowly and handed him a folder Sylvia had prepared. Inside were copies of the easement documents, county confirmations, legal opinions, everything. Brent flipped through it fast at first, then slower, then slower. I watched the exact moment reality finally hit him. The water rights were real, and his HOA had never secured them. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, he seemed genuinely nervous. "You planned this?" "No," I said honestly. "You did." That shut him up. For about 3 whole seconds. Then came the threats again. Court. Injunctions. Financial damages. Public nuisance. The problem was, he'd already tried all that. And county officials had confirmed I was operating completely within legal limits. See, after the pressure complaints exploded, the county water department actually sent inspectors out to the ranch. Nice older guy named Tom walked the line with me Friday evening, checked the permits, checked the valve installation, reviewed the easement filings, then finally sighed and said, "Well, this is above my pay grade, but legally, he's covered." Word spread fast after that. Then local news got involved. And that's where everything completely collapsed for Brent. A reporter from Channel 8 came out Monday afternoon wanting the rancher side of the story. I almost turned them away, But Sylvia looked at me and said, "Public pressure matters. Let people see who you are." So they filmed me standing beside the livestock tank while Rosie drank water behind me. And when the reporter asked why I'd taken such drastic action, I said the simplest, truthful thing I could think of. Because they cared more about appearances than living animals. That clip spread everywhere. By that night, people online were tearing the HOA apart. Residents started questioning board spending, legal oversight, even the original development contracts. Turns out once homeowners realized their multi-million-dollar property values depended on water rights the HOA never actually owned, panic became outrage real quick. 3 board members resigned before the week ended. One family put their house on the market immediately. And Brent disappeared for almost 4 days. Then Thursday evening, right around sunset, I heard tires crunching up the gravel driveway again. Only this time, no shouting, no contractors, no threats. Just Brent stepping out alone, holding a leather folder against his chest like a man arriving at church to confess sins. I was sitting on the fence near the pasture watching the sun drop behind the ridge when he walked over. He looked exhausted, older somehow. "You win," he said quietly. I remember shrugging and saying, "Wasn't supposed to be a competition." For a minute, neither of us talked. Then he asked, "What would it take to end this?" That was the moment right there. The moment every revenge story builds toward. Power shifting completely. And weirdly enough, I didn't feel angry anymore. Just tired. I told him there were 2 options. Option 1. The HOA paid $15,000 to permanently remove all violations against my ranch, sign legal protection against future livestock complaints, and formally acknowledge my property rights moving forward. Option 2. They could purchase the water rights outright. $340,000. Brent actually laughed at that one. Not because it was funny. More because he realized I knew exactly how trapped they were. "You'd really sell them?" I looked out toward the subdivision below us. All those identical rooftops glowing orange in the sunset. "No," I said, "but you should understand what they're worth." He wrote the check for option 1 that same night. And ever since then, things have been quiet. The tank still sits exactly where it always did. Rusty, ugly, practical. Rosie passed away last winter, but the other horses still crowd around it every afternoon when the heat rolls in. Sometimes I stand up on the ridge at dusk and watch the sprinklers kick on down in Ashbury trails, water spraying across all those perfect HOA-approved lawns. And every single time, I smile a little, because somewhere down there, Brent Coulter has to explain to residents every year why the ranch they hated so much is the only reason water still reaches their homes. Now honestly, maybe I went too far. Maybe using water pressure to make a point crossed a line. I still think about that sometimes. But then again, maybe communities work better when people remember respect matters more than appearances. You tell me, if you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have just removed the tank and kept the peace? Let me know in the comments, because I guarantee people are going to be split on this one.